Recording. We can start whenever.
Yeah. Give me 1 second.
By the way, if anyone's here, there's a coffee break session on Friday at 12 noon, similar to the one that we held last week. So it's an event on Discord. You can go to the event and set a reminder so that it actually gives you a pop-up when it starts. And yeah.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we can see a whiteboard. You're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so it's sort of a follow-up to the presentation that I had last week. So what I'm essentially trying to do is to create a standardized way that we can compare different liquidity protocols. And there's a couple of different nuances to this that I think aren't very well understood across sort of the DeFi industry, but also users of DeFi in a way, sort of the DeFi culture that's not well understood. And some of that was evidenced recently when we spoke about, following the community call last week, where people were asking, if the results were sort of cherry-picked or something like that. And I just want to assure everyone that that's not my ambition, right? The whole idea is to come up with something where you cannot cherry-pick a result. And it's challenging for a number of reasons. One is that things like time dependence and volume dependence and the profitability of AMMs is something you can't really simulate fairly, right? There is this intrinsic sort of market inefficiency that if you are allowed as the simulator to make that whatever you want, then of course you can force any protocol to be to appear more profitable than any of the others. And so the thing that I'm sort of working on is this idea that you can actually create a time independent simulation, which is weird because we're talking about sort of price charts and everything else. But let me sort of explain what I mean by that. You can imagine if you've got a price chart like this, where we have sort of time on the x-axis and then the price of a certain asset up here. You're probably pretty familiar with the Heikin-Ashi sort of candlesticks. And for those who aren't super familiar with it, don't worry, I'll do my best to describe it. But essentially, each one of these little blocks represents a certain component in time. And the bottom of this candlestick is where the price opened, right? So if this was, I don't know, $1 or something, and the top of the body of this candle is $2, then this means that if this was, let's say, the 1 minute chart, then it means that during this minute, the start of that minute, the price started at $1, and by the end of that minute, the price is at $2. And then you've got wicks either side. Maybe this bottom wick can be something like, I don't know, that looks to be maybe 50 cents. And then up here, we'll say that that's $2.50. These wicks, what it means is during that minute, there was at least one moment in time where someone paid, 50 cents for whatever this token is, and there was another moment in time where someone paid $2.50. Now, this is an extreme example, right? This probably wouldn't be a good 1 minute chart. This might be a good 1 month chart, for example. But what you're looking at is essentially a snapshot in time, right? A way of compacting down the information. And so what you could imagine is extracting this single candlestick into its own price chart, where instead of doing 1 month, you now do something like 1 week, and then you'll have a bunch of other candlesticks moving around with their own wicks and their own everything for the 1 week. And then for each one of those, you could easily extract another price chart, right? And then this becomes maybe the 1 day price chart and so on. And there's literally from a simulation perspective, there's no limit to how many times you sort of unpack this sort of babushka doll of different candlesticks. And so when someone says, for a particular price chart, whether it be Hackenashi or whatever, maybe it just looks something like this, whatever that happens to be, there's a sort of a problem with it, because when we're comparing liquidity protocols, especially things like Uniswap v2 to Carbon and Uniswap v3 to Carbon, there is a volume-dependent component of how profitable those things are. So, for example, it could be that we have a look at a price chart, a historical price chart, that has a very sort of, let's call it Uniswap v3 leaning behavior. What I mean by that is you might have a price that does something like this, and then maybe goes up to some other range and goes something like this. And maybe, let's just say that it just keeps continuing on that way. And so for Uniswap v3, this is really great, right? Like when these kinds of chart patterns are appearing, you can say, fine, like what I want to do is create a concentrated liquidity position between, these ranges here. And let's say that that's for some length of time, T1. And then up here, you want to create another concentrated liquidity position for some time P2. And when you're presenting an analysis of this, you want to make sure that you are capturing the fact that it doesn't necessarily matter how far these price intervals were. I mean, it's an important consideration, but it's not necessarily the most important consideration. Because what you really want to know is how much volume is in here. And this is extremely important. And this is why, Uniswap and the community that it's building pays so much attention to volume. Because it really is the thing that's going to determine how profitable your position is. And we can continue to zoom in on smaller and smaller components of this, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. So let's say through here, for example, this looks like a pretty good Uniswap v3 strategy, right? If you've got this like wiggling price and maybe these bounds are a bit high, we could use a more reasonable price interval there. And if we just compare these two, and I would say choose one, right? Like that this is going to happen, but you can only choose one of these strategies to create, right? And let's say that I allow you at the end of this time interval to remove that liquidity position. And similarly, up here it doesn't really matter because you can just create that liquidity position way back here and it wouldn't make any difference. But the point is that I will, allow you to basically have a 0 IL component to both of these. If I ask you which one is more profitable, you might expect that the one where you spend more time in a certain range is the one that's more profitable. But that's only true if the average volume per unit time is equivalent. It could be that this one here, despite its shortness, maybe processed something like $10 million in liquidity, whereas this one, even though it spent so much time there, only processed $10,000 in liquidity. So you can't just look at the time, and this is the problem that I'm having with some people who want to talk to me about strategies and price charts and things like that. Is that when you're comparing Carbon to Uniswap v3, these volume numbers are super important. And that's tricky from a simulation perspective, because at the crux of it, what we really want to have is something where you imagine some super efficient market where there is some agreed upon change by everyone in that market as to what the value of a certain asset is. And this means that we don't have to, put in too much randomness into, like, we can still have randomness with respect to the price and how that affects volume, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But what we don't want to do is to sort of say, well, on Uniswap v3, the slippage is lower, therefore we can give it some arbitrary amount of volume, or we can sort of select the volume that we want in order to, get a particular result. And the reason we don't want to do that isn't because it's a bad assumption. but because it biases the simulation, right? We're bringing ourselves and our own expectations into what's happened. And so the question is, if there is a volume dependence here, how do we inject that into a code such that people will agree, right, that there is no such bias, right, that I haven't contaminated the results of the simulation with my own my own inclination. And there is a good way that we can discuss that, and that is by letting time become non-constant. What do I mean by that? If you imagine a hyper-efficient market, and let's say that there's some token that's value is currently, I don't know, $1. And then at some future time, and it doesn't matter when that time is, its value becomes 10% higher. So let's say $1.10. How would a hyper-efficient market respond when it's got access to all three of these protocols, right? Something like Uniswap v2, Uniswap v3, and Carbon. And that's the thing that I'm currently working on, and there is a way to do it, and I can explain it to you right now. And that is that if we have a look at, let's say, a Uni v2 pool, we might see that that there's a token price, and there's always going to be two, okay? So for example, and this is something that, if you haven't seen it before, I can very quickly show it to you now. The traditional way of quoting the marginal price on a constant product AMM is Y over X, right? Where Y and X are the two token balances. So if we've got a Uniswap v2 pool with TKN and USDC, then Y and X are the same thing. And so you might expect, right, that if you have a Y balance of 100 and an X balance of 100, then the price is exactly 1. But unfortunately, that's not true, because there's a fee, and that fee gets tacked onto here. And so the price in one direction, right, if you are trying to extract Y in this case, would be a little bit less than 1, right? Let's say the fee is 1%, then this whole thing is going to come out to be 0.99, for example. And so if Y is the TKN balance, then what you could say is that at this moment in time, you can currently buy TKN for 99 cents. Oh, sorry, is this right? You can currently sell. Let's go sell TKN, much better. You can currently sell TKN for something like 0.99. Then the opposite is also true, right? If you're trying to buy TKN, then what we have to do is move this fee component to the bottom, right? So rather than leave it out, I'm just going to put it in a different color so that we can be reminded that it's in a different situation. And so in this particular case, when you're buying TKN from Uniswap, it will quote you a completely different price. And so this is going to be something like 1.001001. And so this thing here, and this is what, if you were listening to the Twitter spaces that we had earlier, one of the things that was raised is that there's actually no such thing as a fee, right? This word fee that we use in AMMs it doesn't quite capture the way that they behave. It's much better to think of this as a bid and ask spread, right? It's exactly the same thing. And this is going to be very important when we start talking about Carbon mechanics, because this bid-ask spread is precisely the thing that the user has control over. And the way that the bid-ask spread moves as positions are traded against is much more nuanced than any other liquidity protocol is. So here we've got a situation where you can sell TKN for 99 cents, but if you want to buy it, it costs a little bit more. And that's because of this directional bias that you get out of the fee, or the so-called fee. So that's fine. So then, let's imagine that we've got a bid-ask spread on Uniswap, and we can just, I'm just going to throw out ridiculous numbers here. Let's say that you can buy TKN for, let's say, 90 cents. But if you sell TKN, you can only sell it for something like 85 cents, right? So that's a pretty hefty fee, but again, it's going to be helpful just for the demonstration of this. And so the question now is, when we're talking about that hyper-efficient market, okay, let's say that the market has decided that the market price is equal to 87 cents. My question is, will anything happen, right? Will a trade be executed? And again, you've got to think like someone who is programming a simulation, right? If we're assuming a hyper-efficient market, and you can only buy TKN currently for 90 cents and sell TKN currently for 85 cents, then there is no arbitrage opportunity, right? If you imagine like an infinite source of liquidity somewhere where you can effectively arbitrage this system, then there is no opportunity to be had because your market price is currently right in the middle of the spread, right? You're somewhere in between. And that is going to be true all the way up to when you all the way up to a situation where this market price breaches one of these thresholds. Now, there are some other nuances, and when we come back, like when I actually reveal the simulation code, I'll also show you that it takes many arbitrages to get to like a perfect result. Because if you arbitrage it once and simulate, a perfect arbitrage, like you get the actual calculation right where your profits are perfect, then because the fee is left behind on the target side of the pool, there's actually another arbitrage created there where you can actually effectively buy back the fee from the pool that you've just paid. And so I have to iterate this process a few times in order to actually come up with an effective arbitrage. And I'll show you on my screen at the end of this discussion what that looks like so that you can have a look. But let's imagine then that the market price actually does move somewhere, right? Let's say that the market price moves to $1. What do you think would happen? Now will a trade be executed on Uniswap V10? Glenn, what do you think? Yeah, exactly right. And selling to the market in this context, in the simulation context, doesn't actually need to happen, right? All we need is for people to agree that this thing is worth $1, and then they just buy it, right? Maybe they're arbitraging against their own internal, expectations for something, right? The same way that when shopping centers put, jewelry or clothing or something on sale, the reason why people buy it is because they think it's worth more than the current price. Not because they're going to go and sell that clothing item on eBay or something, but just because they are interested in getting it at that lower price, and that's one way you can think about it. The point is, we never actually have to close this arbitrage in the simulation. There doesn't need to be a sell thing unless we're arbitraging between protocols. But to try and make it as unbiased as possible, we're just imagining that people agree that the market price is what it is, and if that token is on sale, right, in one of these protocols, then they're going to buy it. So my question, Glenn, is if the market price is going to be $1. So let's try and capture this. So Uniswap, if we were to divide its price up, we'd see that on this side, right, it's got all this liquidity coming up, where the first price that you can buy your TKN for, what did I say it was? Like 80, was it 90 cents? Right. And then on this side, when you can sell your TKN, was Yeah, it was only 85. Good. Okay. And when the market price was at 87, which was between these two things, we agreed that there's nothing to happen, right? The market doesn't do anything with this protocol. But what about when so if this is the price here was 87, and I said that the price is going to move to $1. My question is, how do I move this spread on a constant product AMM? Where does it go? Right, when someone performs this arbitrage, where do they arbitrage up to? Yeah, it's exactly right. So, and it's interesting when you have conversations with people about the mechanics of constant product AMM as to whether or not the bid-ask spread should fall either side of this new price, and it doesn't. Right? When the market makes this move, in one direction, it will put that first part of the spread exactly over $1, and the other part of the spread will be lagging behind it. Right? So the liquidity sort of starts on either side like that. And so now you can continue to buy TKN at $1. But the moment you even buy one weight of it, it's going to tick over, right, to the next value, right, where according to the constant price, the constant product formula. But on this side, right, when you're selling TKN, I can't remember what I said the spread was, but let's say it's at like 90 cents now, right, just to pick a number. The point that I'm making is that when the market price moves in one direction, you can think of it as like dragging the spread along with it, and it's this part behind it, right, that defines the spread in the other direction. And so when you're arbing, you have to sort of pull both of these values with you, and that means that when if the market wants to move back again, so let's say we choose a new price between $1.90. Let's say it moves back to a price of 95. Because that new market price is now inside of this spread, there is no arbitrage opportunity, right? No one is going to swap on Uniswap V2 during this type of situation. Okay, so the point that I'm making here is that there is a deterministic way that you can use actual values from imagined market moves and simulate at each step of the simulation exactly what the swaps will be and exactly what that liquidity profile would look like in a situation where the markets are 100% efficient. So let's think about how that's going to impact volume mechanics. Okay, so what I've said is, if you think about the sort of the way that I'm approaching the simulation, 100% efficient. Okay, and this means that we can at least benchmark protocols against each other in a fair way. And I've also said that time is irrelevant. And you can think about this one, right? And this is the one that I think trips the most people up. Because I never said that a step in the simulation is equal to 1 minute or 1 hour or whatever. And I also don't say that each step in the simulation has to represent the same unit of time. So let's think about that for a second. If we have let's say that we've got a sequence of different prices. We say that the token price starts at $1, and then it moves to $1.10, and then it moves to 50 cents, and then it moves to $2 and whatever, right? We can create just a list of numbers and say that each time we move the simulation to that point, then that is going to cause, that's when we're going to equilibrate the whole system and measure the volume in each liquidity provider's, relative position and so on. But this will work even if the distance between these 2 points in time might be 1 minute, and this could be 3 minutes, right? This could be 1 microsecond, right? And this could be, 200 years. It really doesn't matter. All we're looking at is at each point in the simulation, how would a hyper-efficient market respond? And it doesn't need time as an input. And so what that means is that in order to translate this fair simulation, right, this way of comparing, different liquidity protocols with each other, we need to introduce some sort of term that will take a Heikin-Ashi sort of candlestick like this and say, okay, in this point, right, we know where the price started and where the price ended. And so we can generate a whole list of numbers here. And the question is, how many? And there's more than one way you can approach it. And this is one of the things that I haven't decided yet exactly how I want to do it. But if this candle, right, and the other data that you usually have on these things is like a volume bar, right? And so what we can do is we can say, okay, we should generate a whole bunch of numbers in here. And if this is like the 1 day chart, we can always extract the 1 minute chart from it and actually get a precise sequence of different numbers. But I think that the way that we should extract it is essentially to let this volume bar normalize how many steps of the simulation we actually use, and therefore how many points we sample throughout here. And so if we've got a candlestick like this one with a really high volume, followed later by a really short, maybe, or it doesn't really matter how high or high low the candlestick is, with a really small volume, then we can say, okay, however we decide to sample this thing, and we know the closing rate, we know the opening rate, we know the closing rate, and we know all of the rates that happened in between. What we want to do is expand that out into a list, right, of just all of those numbers that I had it before, where it was something like, $1 and then $2 and so on. As long as all of these numbers are contained within, this thing, and that the opening price and the closing price equal the opening price and closing price in the list, and that all of the numbers in the middle are evenly sampled across the entire width of those wicks, and that this total number, right, let's call it n samples that you have for running that simulation, is normalized to the volume that was associated with that particular candlestick. I think this is the best and most fair way to do it. And it's going to be weird because it means that when we're looking at the price charts that the simulation generates, right, we could have, because this is no longer time, right? This is just steps of the simulation. And we're still going to have price here. And because we're doing it per step, it will just look nice and normal like this. But what you might find is that you can have something that runs like a really, really long time here with thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of different data points. So if I make that nice and smooth, right, it might look something like this, where this part here might represent just a single candlestick, right? And remember, all candlesticks for a particular chart have the same time length. And then there might be another part of the chart which goes, sideways like this, And because of the low volume that you get here, right, this might be like 100 candlesticks. And I will be writing this up. This is, this is something that I'm taking very, very seriously, because I don't like, I do want to hold myself to the standard of not sort of introducing biased or prejudiced data into a thing. And, it is important, I think, for all of us to really have a good idea of what these different liquidity protocols are good for, and what their payout profiles are actually look like. Because on Uniswap V3, you are always long volume, right, and fees, right? You're short gamma, and we can come back to this kind of stuff later, but it's so important. The thing is that you're not just betting that the price won't go anywhere, but you're also betting that there's going to be a significant volume through that position, right, through that whatever interval of time you've chosen. Whereas on Carbon, you don't really care about the volume. You only care about, and this is one of the things I said in a community call recently, even if someone only trades against you once, you can still be highly profitable. So you can have a volume of, however large your position is. So it might be, if you've got like a $5,000 position, you might only need $5,000 in volume in order to remain profitable. Whereas Uniswap V3 and Uniswap V2 don't really have that profile. They actually require a lot more trades, and that's not good or bad, but it is something that we need to be aware of when we're comparing these systems. Okay, so let's come back to them. How does volume feed into a system where we're doing something? Well, remember, I said when we're taking one of these candlesticks, right, and we're looking at the volume bar underneath it, and this is determining how many samples we create. This will mean intrinsically that if there is, if there is a lot of volume, even for a very small candlestick. Okay, so let's say that we've got a candlestick like this one. Okay, and then we've got another candlestick like, so if this is open, this is closed. Let's say it went up like that. Okay, but the volume here is very, very low. What you're going to start finding is that these types of candlesticks are the ones that Uniswap V3 likes, right? So this is the money stick for Uniswap. Whereas these kinds, where there's a very large change in price but a small volume, right? This is the one that the Uniswap doesn't, right? This is the one where you've got very, very large IL and very, very few trades across it. And so this is, super important. And when we're comparing a concentrated liquidity protocol to a standard constant product protocol, the only thing that you care about is during this sample range, right? And again, remember that the number of samples that we're taking inside here is equivalent to or normalized to the volume of this bar. Is how often can the market respond to your protocol, right? So not looking at user ambitions, not trying to model inefficiency, just how likely is it that someone would have traded against UniV2 or UniV3 or Carbon during such a move. And that is why concentrated liquidity is so important, and I think it's why a lot of people fail to understand precisely like what concentrated liquidity does. So we had before this kind of diagram where we said on Uniswap V2, you might have, I don't know, like a dollar and 90 cents. Sorry for that. Might have a $1 and a 90-cent sort of spread. And again, these numbers are insane, but I'm using them just for convenience. So whenever the market price is in the middle here, there are no trades. So you're not getting any volume, you're not getting any, you're not getting any fees, but what we're really saying is you're not, people aren't straddling the spread and you're not making any money there. On something like Uniswap V3, because of the concentration, that same amount of capital, let's say that this whole Uniswap V2 pool might have had, I don't know, $10,000 in liquidity. All Uniswap V3 does is it drives the spread very close together. Okay, So if you've got, if we were to model how Uniswap V3 would behave under a similar situation, what you might find is that the spread on one side is at something like $1, and on the other side might be at like 0.0.9999999. So right, and it's this spread that you are trying to earn when you're using a concentrated liquidity protocol in general, right? When you're using a normal like Uniswap V3 or Trader Joe's liquidity book, this is basically your gambit. And again, in terms of the Heiken Ashi candles, you're hoping for very, very small candles, very, very little price, and enormous volumes, right? This is, it's the same as saying, I bet that this is going to happen, right? And that's why I provided liquidity, because I'm guessing where the top and the bottom of this candle are, and I am hoping that if I'm right, that there's a huge amount of volume here. Sure, like if there's not as much volume and you're still right about the candlestick, profile, you're still going to be okay. You just won't make as much money. But if the volume is low and the candlestick is high, then you've made a very, very bad decision because the gamma is going to completely wipe you out here. And this is what we're trying to show. So now let's talk about carbon. Okay. So we're now into a system, and the reason why I built up to it this way is because we are trying to understand that all liquidity protocols, Uniswap V2, Uniswap V3, Trader Joe's liquidity book, and Carbon, you can think of them all as having this spread. It's just what does the spread do when people trade against it? With Uniswap V3, it still moves around the same way it does on a normal constant product AMM. It's just that as it moves out of your tick range, you now need to initialize a new tick, and there's different liquidity there and so on. But it's the same thing as just achieving a smaller spread. What about Carbon? So let's say that we're not going to emulate all of Carbon in aggregate, but just a single position, where someone has created a position on this side with some amount of liquidity, where they're going to buy TKN, starting at $1 and moving up to whatever, let's say $2. And then on the other side, is there oh wait, we're going to do this the other way around. Let's say that this is their sell, and this is going to be their buy. And we're going to choose $1 as being the same place, but then they're moving down to, let's say, 50 cents. Question is, what happens when those same changes in the market occur? So we know that just like a normal AMM, if these are buy and sell ranges, then every price between these two thresholds is met, right? So at the moment, if someone wants to buy TKN from this liquidity provider, they can do it starting at $1 and moving up to $2, and we can calculate that arbitrage situation in a hyper-efficient market in more or less the same way that we're going to do it for Uniswap V2 and Uniswap V3, and the same in the opposite. But the difference is that the spread doesn't move symmetrically. So, for example, let's say that we did do a move where the market took the price of TKN to $1.50. At the moment here, there's a zero spread, right, with the liquidity provider set up this way. But what happens is, all you do is increase that spread. So now the price is at $1.50. If someone wants to keep buying it from you, all right, you're going to keep selling it at increasing prices. But this part hasn't moved. And this is the thing that makes Carbon special. What makes Carbon asymmetric is that the price that this liquidity provider or this trader, this maker, has nominated to buy their TKN for, it has not changed. And so but what is happening is that if this is TKN being sold for USDC, then, if we were to represent liquidity on some other axis, we would find that the amount of liquidity in this range is increasing, but not its boundaries, not its price boundaries. And then what that means is, if the price was to retrace, let's say back down to something like 75 cents, then this part will move, and the sell wall, will only move as far as that original position, right back to where it was at $1. And then, just like this, we saw in this one, the liquidity inside this range will start to increase. So this thing, right, this behavior of having the spread for a single position change the way it does in the way that Carbon is designed. This is the thing that I want to make sure that people understand, because this is the thing that is completely volume independent, right? All you really care about is where the market moves to and whether or not there is sufficient volume at that price to take you at the price that you've nominated. And again, we're assuming in a hyper-efficient market that it's all of it. And obviously that's something that we'll need to append as a footnote, as a caveat to the simulation, that if you put $1 trillion of liquidity in here, the simulator will quite happily lay that off on a market that's willing to take it. But in real markets, they just aren't that efficient, and so we need to make sure that there are reasonable limits when you're comparing these. But one of the things that I'm enforcing, at least in the work that I'm doing right now, is that the Uniswap v2, Uniswap v3, and Carbon positions all have the same amount of capital in them. And this is good because it means that for those changes, we can simulate what the volume would be through these positions with actually pretty good accuracy. So things like Uniswap v3 having an increased volume compared to Uniswap v2, it actually just naturally falls out of the system, because again, when we're talking about those spreads on something like Uni v2, if you're in the middle of the spread, you need the price to move quite a long way in order to get to a position where the market has something that it can do. Whereas on Uni v3, because it's so small, that spread, or that effective spread, there's not a lot of room in here for nothing to happen. So much smaller price changes result in much greater trading opportunities from that market. And this is why people have heard me say previously that the IL ramifications of something like Uniswap v3 can be cataclysmic. Because if you happen to miss your mark, then the amount of trading activity that you will see against you can actually be very, very, very high. But it also means that from a simulation perspective, we don't need to inform the simulation that the volume on Uniswap v3 should be higher. It just falls out as a natural consequence of the fact that there is more liquidity around the price, and that the spread is that much thinner. And so I think, for a DAO discussion, this is kind of what I wanted to talk about. Because you're going to start seeing, Nate and I will be working together on some stuff, and we'll be looking at historical price charts and, finding out some ways that we can best communicate exactly what it is that Carbon does and who it's built for. But in order to do that, I really need to make sure that, at least as a community, we have a good understanding of how these things work. And so I don't know what the best way to do this is, whether or not we just keep doing it on the DAO discussions or use the community call for it, or whatever it is. But I want to make sure that we at least can speak intelligently about these things, and also impassionately. I'm not doing this to try and find flaws with these other systems, right? There will be times, and I will demonstrate them, where Uniswap v3 is a really excellent decision. And there will be times where Uniswap v2 is a better decision than Uniswap v3 or Carbon. It's just that I to outline and section off exactly what it is, exactly what the niche is that Carbon is occupying. And if we don't get if we don't get those legs under us, and we don't have people describing or able to explain what those differences is, I think that it will be a much more uphill battle than it needs to be. So I think I'm gonna stop talking. I think I've spoken for too long, but I am looking forward to getting this information out to you. Like I said, I've been working on the simulation a lot today. I've had some other things last week that have taken me away from it, unfortunately. But the ambition is to first of all put it in all of your hands and anyone's hands who wants to use it. Have something like a Medium article. I'll probably write that myself that describes exactly what these principles are and why I consider it to be a fair and unbiased simulation, and then yeah, discuss with you guys like how you think it should be used, right? If there are some historical price charts and so forth that you think would be interesting. Sorry, someone's calling me. That yeah, we can do that. Oh. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right. So what Glenn is referring to, right, is when we have a look at what this spread is on a conventional constant product AMM. Remember that price equation that I gave you looks something like this, where you just take the whatever the Y balance of tokens is minus the fee over X, and then you would do the same thing in the opposite direction, and that gives you the difference here. But it also means that this whole spread thing, it's constant, right? It's sorry, Mike, what did you say?
All right, let's try a different way. What are
I think Mike's on the phone. I'm going to mute him.
Yeah, I don't think that's meant for you, Mark.
9573.
Oh no, he's giving us his credit card information now. Thanks.
Yeah, I muted him before he's just giving some scammers private keys. Yeah, so the point that Glenn's making here is that the difference in these two prices that a constant product AMM will sell for, at least proportionally, it remains constant. So as the AMM trades, some future version of this spread, it's going to look more or less the same, but just at a different position. So as it trades, this whole thing will move up like that. But what Glenn is trying to point out is that on Carbon, the way that the liquidity moves is not like that at all. So, for example, I'll come up with an exaggerated way of drawing this. Let's say that you've got your two positions like this, and I'm going to represent the height of them as being the amount of liquidity that's there. So let's say that the market price of my blue pen is somewhere like this. Then obviously, if the price moves anywhere between these price thresholds, no one's trading with you, right? And you shouldn't expect that. But as soon as the price starts to move into this one, let's say that it moves 30% of the way through, and we expect about 30% of this liquidity to go, right? So let's say this part is traded out. Rather than moving the price point on this order further towards this one, which is the behavior that you would expect of a traditional AMM. Instead, this shaded region, whatever liquidity it's worth over here, gets added to the height of this one, right? And that's how it keeps your range the same. So then, what we've got then is this new liquidity height. for this one, which is increased, and a new liquidity height for this one, which is decreased. So if I were to then sort of make that change permanent by, and I'm going to leave where the top of that one was, just so that we can be reminded. So this is our new liquidity here, but we had previously this amount of liquidity up here. So now we're going to say the market price is moving back into this range, right? So maybe the market price here goes about halfway through. So we expect about half of this liquidity to go. So let's make that clear. So we've got this new amount of liquidity in that position. And if we've depleted 50% of it, maybe down here, then this part here gets added to this one by approaching the liquidity level that it came from. And so what's interesting is that as the price moves further and further into this range and this liquidity goes further and further down, rather than this edge in terms of the spread getting any closer, all we're doing is increasing the amount of liquidity back to its original point. And if and if we continue to perform well, then all we're going to do is keep moving this liquidity range up, right? So you can see now if we trade back to some position, these two piston-like structures, they just kind of keep ratcheting up during the process. But that's a really key observation, is that the price level that we have is of course a function of how much liquidity is in here. And so as the liquidity drains from here and gets added back to this one, the price will change, but only up to a certain point. And then after that, the amount of liquidity available in that range is increasing, whereas the price is staying constant. Again, I know that this is a lot of information to take in, and I'm still thinking about the best ways that we can describe these things, and the simulator will help with that. But I just kind of wanted to lay a foundation. I realize I'm speaking quite cavalierly, and I probably could have been more prepared for this, and I'm sorry that the simulator isn't ready yet.
No, this was a good run through, Mark. I just really quickly, is the process you just described more capital efficient than like what you would see on a centralized exchange, or is it like exactly the same as what a market maker would do like on a centralized exchange?
Yeah, it depends. So in conventional markets, there are strategies, mathematical descriptions of how a market is evolving that will tell you how to set this spread, right? So a professional market maker, what they are interested in doing is spamming, the order book to keep this range, right? To keep the distance between here at whatever number their algorithm or their model says that it should be kept at in order to maintain a certain risk profile. What's interesting is that Carbon is actually kind of approaching that kind of behavior. What you heard Alex on our Twitter Spaces earlier say is that having a constant spread, right, no matter where you are, like there is no market operation that behaves that way. And so for Carbon to have this dynamic spread, right, where the price actually does dynamically change as things move around, it's much closer to something that sophisticated professional market makers would do. But I would never go as far to say as that this is an algorithm that would reflect the best case scenario, right, on every order book or something like that. But in terms of capital efficiency, it's hard to know exactly what you mean there. We could treat capital efficiency as being, a certain liquidity level that someone can exchange tokens at. It could be, I prefer the definition of capital efficiency as being the amount of returns you make per dollar, which is clearly not what capital efficiency means in DeFi. But yeah, in terms of overall effectiveness, right? If we can call it capital effectiveness, then yes, this is closer to something that has been used for many years and it's very, very, very distinct from traditional concentrated liquidity protocols and from constant product market makers as well.
Yeah, I think effectiveness is probably a better word, but that answers my question. Thanks, Mark.
My pleasure. Yeah, so I think we're coming up on the hour right now, so that's actually probably a good place to stop. But if you guys think this kind of thing is useful, this is kind of what I wanted to do with what I would like to do with DAO discussions. Maybe sometimes I'll have something that's a little bit more thoroughly prepared, and I'm happy to PowerPoints and things like that. But sort of in the same the same vein as what we were doing with the early simulator discussions and things like that. I think we should continue to sort of let this be a brainstorming sort of session. If someone else wants to present something, I think we should. I would be very happy for them to lead a discussion and stuff as well. But I think that we should continue to use this as kind of our our thinking space, and to do stuff that's not necessarily you know exclusively focused on narrative or anything like that, but actually thinking about how things work. And I'm hoping eventually, when we've got a lot of like traders in our system, we can start doing more data-based, really well-informed discussions here. That is more, let's say, more academically oriented than the kind of stuff we do in community calls and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think I'm happy to close it there unless anyone's got any questions.
Yeah, sounds good. I think once we have the alpha out too, we can have more like one-to-one discussions about how it works too. So I'm excited for that.
I think it would be really nice as well. Remember we discussed the Tenderly thing, Tyler. Mm-hmm. A lot of the simulation stuff that I'm doing right now, we can actually sort of validate it because when we have that Tenderly fork for the alpha, Uniswap v3 will be there as well. And so if we want to, use like a TKN7 or whatever the dummy token contract is that we want to use for that, we can actually, deploy a single concentrated liquidity position on Uniswap v3 on that fork and actually have a look heads up about, how these things look even on the EVM, so that we don't have to take, my Python code's word for it. We can, actually see what it looks like. That the advantage there as well is that we can also get an estimate for the gas thing, which is something that I didn't talk about here, which is that on my simulation ignores gas, and there's a good reason for that. One is that Uniswap v3 gas considerations are really hard. At the moment, I'm just using a standard concentrated liquidity curve, and I can process trades as often as I like, and it will it will match Uniswap v3 across that tick range. But I really don't want to have to do the sort of tick initialization thing that Uniswap has done. So for people who aren't familiar, like as you cross out of a tick, the gas price increases quite a lot because you then, as the trader, have to pay the gas fee of initializing that next tick. And this is why you're limited to crossing 6 ticks. It's like 0.6%, I think, is a volatile move. Because if you cross too many ticks, you'll exhaust the gas for the blocker and so forth. And they're just trying to keep that manageable. So my simulation just ignores gas. And my hope is that eventually we can build that into there and start looking at what I've called previously gas-adjusted token pricing. Because it's something that should be taken into consideration. It is a bad assumption to ignore it, but at least in this case, we're ignoring it for all protocols equally, which means that while there's probably some inequalities there, I'm still happy at using that simplification at least to analyze the models.
Yeah, and we also don't know how Ethereum operates since it's transitioned to proof of stake. It hasn't really been battle tested quite like it was when it was proof of work over 2021. So yeah, there's still some question marks there, but regardless, yeah, once we have the alpha out, I think these will become even more useful when we have some kind of corroboration of what we're talking about here.
Good. All right then. Cool.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, you're welcome.